1952, the world needed an elite counterinsurgency and intelligence group. This special force is known around the world as the Green Berets.
I would like to ask you, is al-Qaeda more or less established in Libya since our involvement?
Mr. Kucinich, I will have to take that question for the record. I am not an intelligence expert.
Oh, you don't have the intelligence, you're saying. Well, I'm going to go on to the next question. The next question. Are Americans safer, Mr. Kennedy? Excuse me.
I think the other two may have an opinion also, if you wanted to ask them.
Well, I wanted to ask Ambassador Kennedy. Next question, Ambassador Kennedy. How many shoulder-to-air missiles are capable of shooting down civilian passenger airlines are still missing in Libya? And this happened since our intervention. Can you answer that question?
No, sir. I'll be glad to provide it for the record.
You're saying that you don't know?
I do not know, sir. It's not within my normal purview of operations at the State Department.
Does anyone else here know how many shoulder-to-air missiles that can shoot down civilian airliners are still loose in Libya? Does anyone know?
The figures that we were provided were fluid, but the rough approximation was between 10 and 20,000.
Yeah, the gentleman's time has expired. Did you want them to answer anything about al-Qaeda growth?
If anyone there knows the answer.
If anyone has an answer on that one, they can answer, and then we'll move on.
Is al-Qaeda more or less established in Libya since our involvement?
Yes, sir, and their presence grows every day. They are certainly more established than we are.
Thank you. With that, we recognize the chairman of the subcommittee and a doggedly determined individual to get to the bottom of this, Mr. Chaffetz.
Special Forces tends to be the quiet professional. We don't like to pat ourselves on the back. We don't like the ballyhoo, the photos. So as a result, it was nice to have someone like Robin Moore bring us into the limelight.
I've always wanted to do
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Nordstrom, as we spoke before, and I think is clear in the record, you were asking for more personnel, and that was either rejected or denied or just simply ignored, correct?
Actually, to clarify, we were asking just to keep what we had.
And when you weren't able to just even keep what you had, what happened to your pay and the other security officers on the ground?
I'm sorry.
As I recall, what you told me is when that was denied, you were given a pay increase. They increased your pay.
Okay. What I think you're referring to is the increase in danger pay for post. As part of normal procedures, we are asked for input at post. As part of that process, would provide information on security.
To clarify, you were asking for more assets, more resources, more personnel. That was denied, but the State Department went back and reclassified it as more dangerous. The danger pay, therefore, increased. They didn't tell you that we didn't have resources, hey, that Congress just cut your budget. They gave you an increase because the danger was rising, correct?
That's correct. We received a danger pay increase.
Did the buildings in Benghazi meet the so-called Inman standards? After the bombings in Beirut, we went back as a government, formalized some minimum standards. Did they or did they not meet those minimum standards?
Neither the buildings in Benghazi nor the buildings in Tripoli met those standards, nor was there a plan for the next phase of construction, what was called the interim embassy. Would they meet the standards either? That interim embassy was scheduled to be on the ground for approximately 10 years. That was a major cause of concern, and that was the main physical security issue that we continued to raise.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I would point to an August 20 cable that UN officials believe that the Supreme Security Council is, quote, fading away, unquote, unwilling to take on, quote, anyone with powerful patrons or from powerful tribes, end quote. This cable back to Washington, D.C. also said that incidents continue in this security vacuum, as they refer to it in Benghazi. Mr. Chairman, I would also point to September 4th. In their memo, they highlighted the September 1st, quote, maximum alert. A maximum alert, September 1st. This was the information that was coming. And what's infuriating is that we have hundreds of terrorist types of activities. Our consulate is bombed twice. The British ambassador has an assassination attempt. And you're over here arguing about whether the number was 5 or 2 or 5 or 3. And the security experts who actually even been to Libya didn't get the resources that they asked for. Colonel Wood, did you or participate in any way, shape, or form in requests for additional personnel in Libya, and what was the consequence of those requests?
Yes, sir, I did. I assisted Eric Nordstrom in preparation of the requests for support in as much as they dealt with SST support. I reviewed some of those documents and assisted in the preparation of those. I'd like to add also that there was frustration from the beginning. The initial, or perhaps it was the second request for extension that occurred in April 5th. Ambassador Kretz encountered some difficulty in understanding what was going on. He was getting conflicting signals from DOD and DOS. I got him together with General Ham. They worked out a complete understanding, and General Ham made it very clear to Ambassador Kretz that he could have the SST as long as he needed them. This was a great interagency cooperation, and that was made very clear to him. It was also made clear to John Polishek, who took over as Charge d'Affaires in between Ambassador Kretz and Ambassador Stevens. He came personally and told her that. He also had a VTC with Ambassador Stevens and reiterated that same point, that the SST was his as long as he needed them. All he had to do was request them, and General Ham was perfectly willing to provide that support.
Let's go hot.
Cross-training within a Special Forces group is vital. Today's A-teams consist of 12 men, a number that was developed through trial and error in the 1950s. Vietnam proved that as force multipliers, 12-man teams could be split into 2 teams of 6, or further to 6 teams of 2. And those 2 U.S. soldiers might have the responsibility of several hundred men. Along with the specific training for the individual MOSs, the soldiers continue honing their skills in land navigation, small unit tactics, air operations, and mission planning. These skills are the essentials that all Special Forces operators must master in order to thrive in an ever-changing environment.
Mr. Nordstrom, did you ever specifically ask Charlene Lamb, or did she ever specifically direct you not to ask for additional DOD SST extension?
I recall 2 specific phone calls, one in the February timeframe, one in the July timeframe. I had the opportunity to refresh my recollection on one of those phone calls by talking to the 2 agents who happened to be present in the living room of the ambassador's residence, which is where we used as our office. In those conversations, I recall that I was specifically told, you cannot request an SST extension. How I interpreted that was that there was going to be too much political cost, or for some reason there was hesitancy on that. In the first case in February, the ambassador and DCM and I all felt strongly about the need for that, and we went ahead and requested it anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And we now go to the gentleman from Massachusetts, and we appreciate his patience for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to thank the witnesses, all of you, for your willingness to come and help the committee with its work. Obviously, I want to acknowledge the tremendous sacrifice of Ambassador Stevens and former Navy SEALs Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty, who is a favorite son of Massachusetts, my home state, and as well as Communications Specialist Sean Smith. I want to make 2 points, however. One is, I think the best way to honor the memory of those American heroes is to address the general and global issue of embassy security, so that when we do assign other brave Americans to fill these posts, that they do have adequate security. Now, many members of this committee, both sides of the aisle here, have traveled to the Middle East dozens and dozens of times. We've visited some, and the chairman has mentioned them in his opening remarks, mentioned Damascus, Syria, mentioned Beirut, Lebanon. I just came back from Sana'a, Yemen, where, at least in Yemen, they're undergoing some structural changes there in response to threats there. But we have some embassies that predate even the attacks on Nairobi, Kenya, or Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, so that we've got old world embassies that are located right on the street, right on the souk in the Middle East, and that are terribly exposed to to car bombs and to attacks. So I think the best way really to approach this thing is number one is take a holistic approach to this and figure out how we can prevent this type of thing from happening again. And I think my second point, really the easiest way to strengthen embassy security is to get on the same page. And I have to tell it like it is. And in recent budgets, my Republican colleagues have supported cuts to funding for embassy security. Well, the first thing you got to do to strengthen embassy security is to try to meet Secretary Clinton's request for funding for embassy security. That'll help a lot. Ambassador Kennedy and Ms. Lamb, what would a few $100 million like was cut from the President's request and Secretary Clinton's request for embassy security, what would that mean to you in terms of providing that level of protection that every son and daughter of America deserves when they accept that post to go into a dangerous area, especially some of the spots that we got right now in the Middle East? What would that few $100 million do to your ability to provide an adequate level of protection on their behalf?
Mr. Lynch, if we receive the President's budget request for fiscal year 13, which is still pending before the Congress, we would be able to construct new facilities, and we would be able to upgrade additional facilities to get to the higher standards we seek.
Well, look, I want to go back to the Chairman's point. The situations in Damascus and in Beirut. Obviously, Damascus, we've withdrawn our embassy personnel. But we still got the same problem there. When things get straightened out, we're still on the main street. We're negotiating. We were negotiating. I had personal conversations with President Assad a couple of years ago about getting a new facility there. Do we have a task force that is looking at providing the setback that we need to provide that level of protection and to relocate some of these embassies?
We do, sir. We have a strategic plan. We know which embassies are more in danger than others. We are working through that, but that there are limitations on funds. I can only construct so many new facilities each year, depending on the funds I have available to me.
Okay. I just want to go back to one point, Ms. Lamb. In your written testimony at page 2, first paragraph, you mentioned that in addition to the security team you had there, there was I think you described it as a rapid response force that was located in the annex. How many folks are in that rapid, do you know? How many are in that rapid response task force or team that would help? Or Mr. Nordstrom, I don't know if you know the number of that.
Sir, there were 7, and their job was also to hook up with the...
Point of order. Point of order.
The gentleman will state his point of order.
Again, I would renew my deep concern that we're getting into an area that is classified and should be classified. The dealing with the map is one issue. I believe that the markings on that map were terribly inappropriate, but the activities there could cost lives.
Wait a minute.
I think the gentleman...
All right, on the point of order, let me
wait a second.
May I speak on the point of order?
You may speak on the point of order, of course.
Okay. This whole hearing is responding to allegations that there were not enough people on the ground at the Benghazi facility. Those are accusations that you made publicly. So that now I'm trying to get an answer of how many people were there, and all of a sudden that's off the record? That's classified information? You've got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me.
I'm prepared to rule. Unless you're prepared to get clearance to declassify any and all information about additional personnel. This hearing will be limited to the information already given, which is the amount of individuals who responded from that rapid force. This hearing is not specifically about September 11th, but it's intended to clarify much more prospectively failures, accountability, decisions. I don't think that any of us, and I don't want to overly state this, but I don't think any of us figure that since 4 people are dead, something went wrong. Having said that, there has previously been testimony as to the individuals that have responded. I would certainly recommend the entire committee have a classified briefing as to any and all other assets that were not drawn upon but could have been drawn upon. And I would ask the gentleman to respect that, and I would yield the gentleman an additional 1 minute to finish his questioning.
Okay. Mr. Ambassador, can you clarify any answer around that question that may not violate the
certainly,
okay.
Certainly, sir. The U.S. government, the U.S. mission, the American embassy annexes in Benghazi consisted of 2 separate compounds because we could not all fit on one compound. There were security personnel stationed on both compounds. There was, in effect, a type of mutual assistance arrangements that had been worked out by the regional security officer. So if one compound came under attack, security personnel would flow from one to the other or vice versa. It's a common practice. And so we are very, very interested in making sure that we have the maximum utilization for common U.S. government, State Department security personnel in any country. And we do that, and we are certainly mindful and respectful of the general security concerns.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Only one point of clarification. Mr. Nordstrom, during your time, were those other people under any of your control or a specific, could you task them?
I'm glad you asked that question. Again, in being completely cognizant, because I have some of the same concerns, all of the people there were under the chief of mission, but not necessarily all of the security people fell under my direct operational control.
Thank you. I think that clarifies it. We now go to the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Langford, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I need to shift my questions a little bit from what I intended, just based on some of the conversation that we've had so far. Mrs. Lamb, can you clarify for me, where were you working September the 11th? Were you in the Washington area or in the main facility there?
Yes, sir. I was in the DS Command Center on the evening of the event.
You note that in your testimony that you're in the Diplomatic Security Command Center, and then you make this statement, I could follow what was happening almost in real time.
That's correct.
So once they hit the button in Benghazi, you're alerted. It says you could have. Did you follow what was happening in real time at that point?
Sir, what was happening is they were making multiple phone calls, and it was very important that they communicate with the annex in Tripoli, because this is where additional resources were coming from. So they would hang up on us and then call back.
But you're tracking it back and forth, what's going on.
Yes, absolutely.
Then after a very long night for them, they're evacuated out into Tripoli. Correct. Were they in communication with you then once they got to Tripoli? This would have been the next morning at that point.
No, at that point, Embassy Tripoli took over communicating.
So you had no other communication with them after they got to Tripoli? You weren't aware of that, or?
No. They notified us when there was wheels down. They notified us when they got to the hospital. They notified us when they were wheels up en route to.
Obviously, these are your folks. I mean, I cannot imagine the emotion of that for you. So you had no other connection to know what happened, the details of that, what occurred, these frantic phone calls, all these things that are happening back and forth. They get to Tripoli, and you're not aware anymore of what actually had just happened?
No, sir. We continue to follow them, but half of the team had to be rushed to the hospital and treated, and post was provided. You know, they had just been through a horrific
Oh, it's horrible.
ordeal.
I mean, your detailed account of this is horrific.
And so at this point, providing them the comfort to just come down from the adrenaline and the horror of what had happened, we respected that, and we worked through our colleagues at the embassy in Tripoli.
Right. Here's my struggle with that. You're listening in on the command center. You're in communication as it's going on. They get to Tripoli. There's all kinds of conversations that are happening back and forth as people are checking on them. And yet State Department is testifying still today, 5 days later, they didn't know what happened, that was a coordinated terrorist act. Maybe this was some spontaneous event that occurred when there was constant communication happening. Did someone come to you and ask you from State, was this a protest? Because I would assume you knew pretty quickly this was not some protest that went out of bounds, because there was no protest even there that day. So it's not like there's a big group of people and 24 people jumped out and started shooting. There was no gathering point at all that day, and I would assume you knew that immediately.
No, sir, it was not clear. It was a very large compound, and each individual agent was looking at what was happening from a different perspective and a different angle.
Was it clear to you there wasn't a protest going on outside? I mean, it's not that large of a compound. You can't see out the front gate to know if there's a protest.
No, sir. It happened so fast when they rushed through the gate. It was not clear.
I completely understand. 9:40 at night, but the initial reports were this was some large protest that had happened over a video, and that kind of birthed out of that were people running out with RPGs and had attacked. And Ambassador Kennedy has said that's the best we would know even 5 days later. I find that hard to believe based on your report that you're tracking what's occurring and that individuals, when they get to Tripoli the next morning, are reporting back what happened, that someone didn't say, here's what occurred, and the word protest never came out of it, yet 5 days later no one knows?
Sir, they were all fighting for their lives on that compound. And
I completely understand that. My question is, the testimony seems to be conflicting today. We're getting reports from State that this wasn't them, this was the intelligence community that made this report. But I hear from you, you were aware of what happened and what went on, and others around you and folks at the embassy. I can't imagine 5, 6, 7 days, 7 days later, the White House press secretary standing up and still giving the same report 7 days later, that no one has done this. Now, there are lots of other issues I want to talk about, but I'm kind of amazed at this whole dialogue today, that it seems like no one knew, and there's this best-case scenario of this coming out. And I'm struggling with just the basic facts on this. Now, this is irrelevant to the overall what we're going to do in the future and what happened in the past. But I can't seem to put all these pieces together when I'm getting such conflicting stories of people that are listening to it firsthand what's happening on the ground. Ambassador Kennedy, were you want to respond to that?
If I could, sir. There were multiple reports coming out. Multiple reports.
Were any of the reports saying there was a protest?
There were reports.
There were reports coming out of Benghazi that there were protests that day.
There were reports that we received saying that there were protests, and I will not go any farther than that. And then things evolved. Period. If I could, one other thing.
Well, no, before the gentleman goes, you said you wouldn't go any further. I would only ask why you're not going any further. If you want to revise and extend other things, that's fine. But why won't you go any further?
Because I don't want to cross certain lines in open session.
Okay, so you're testifying there are multiple reports, but then in this setting you cannot tell us the multiple reports and where they came from.
In open session.
I appreciate that. We'll arrange for a classified. If the gentleman will conclude.
Well, just my one issue is there's ongoing conversation happening. There's ongoing conversations the next morning when they're in Tripoli. I find it very difficult 5, 6, 7 days later, the same story is coming out when there was constant communication with a group of people. It just seems like a very difficult story for me to be able to believe.
If I could.
Of course.
As I said in my opening statement, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Langford, there were multiple reports. We are trying to reconcile the reports because we regard our responsibility to keep the Congress informed. We came up very, very early to talk when we still had multiple threads out there. And those multiple, we were not about to precipitously try to reconcile those multiple threads.
I appreciate that, and I do appreciate the fact that 2 days later you called it a terrorist attack. Well, many days later others were using other terms. As I pass over to the minority for a moment, yesterday in a closed session I asked you for the 50-minute tape that exists that would allow us to see the video feed that was available. You said it wasn't available. another part of government had it, even though you had a copy of it. Have you been able to make that available? Because I think on both sides of this side of the dais, we'd like to see that 50 minutes of video that was turned over by the government fairly quickly.
Mr. Chairman, I have made it clear to the other government entity that has this tape. I've communicated your request to them.
With your recommendation that they do turn it over?
Since this is involved in investigative process on their part, I do not feel that I am in a position to make a recommendation about an investigative process.
Thank you. And for the ranking member's edification, I apologize that I only barely learned about that hearing or that briefing in order to get there for a few minutes of it. I want to confirm the FBI is doing the investigation. They do not have custody. Another government agency does. I don't have any doubt that it's not the investigating agency, the FBI, that has custody of that tape. With
Chairman,
that, yes,
Chairman,
of course, Mr.
Same briefing that you talked about, but we were not, the Dems on the committee, we weren't invited.
No, and I apologize.
Didn't even know about it.
Right, and well, no, your committee did know about it.
But we weren't invited.
Were you
invited?
I learned about it in a discussion with the Secretary of State, and so I went up there only then discovering that they were surprised to see me. But I was glad I went there, and I was glad to have the opportunity to confirm the existence of a 50-minute tape that has been floating around that is not needed by the FBI, but in fact is in the custody of another government agency.
Chairman, I would just one more thing. I think that you would agree that if we don't want to do anything to interfere with an ongoing investigation, do we?
I would like this committee to have that 50-minute tape before the press has it. And quite frankly, we should have had it before today to see it. It is not interfering with an investigation. In testimony the last 2 days that both of our committees had, we were told, for example, that when the wall was blown up some months earlier, they didn't see it blown up because they didn't have the video equipment to do it, and it was pointed the wrong way. They told us they didn't have enough people to man the talk, so they, in fact, were not there being able to pan and look for it. They told us they didn't have the people inside, and much of that perhaps is beyond the scope. But since people told us what assets they didn't have with specificity, and that will be in our report, yes, I would like to see what those tapes did discover. Ms. Lamb told us that there was somebody monitoring the talk. Quite frankly, we were told that they slept there, and there were not people to constantly be panning those cameras. So I'd like to see when they began panning them, for example. And there is multiple evidence that we haven't gotten. We're not going to get it here today. I just wanted to make sure that the State Department would be clear that they had no objections to us having it.
Is that right, Mr. Kennedy?
Mr. Cummings, Mr. Chairman, we defer to the law enforcement and investigative elements on this matter.
The FBI told me they don't have it, and it's not theirs, and they don't need it. So hopefully you'll stop using law enforcement, another part of government.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We now go to the very patient gentleman.
يا شاكير وينك